Like, and I always part of the all the event, mostly all the events gently has to have a good community with our SI.
Thank you. That's exactly what I'm looking for.
Hello, I am a junior at Overflow and I'm also part of the school site council. And one of the reasons I decided to join the task force is because I really wanted to see that change, like to come to these schools and communities that we weren't seeing beforehand. So that's basically a summary of why I'm here.
And you are, what's your name?
Oh, sorry, I am Fernando.
Fernando, welcome.
Brian Doe, trustee.
Hi, can you all hear me? Yeah, okay. Hi, I'm Angeles Rojas. I'm with Californians for Justice. I graduated from James Lick. I've been with Californians for Justice since I was like a sophomore in high school. So, and now I'm a staff, I'm organizing director. Yeah, and we're in East Side. I don't know if you want me to share all, but,
I get the picture. I thank you
Okay.
very much. I'm
All right.
appreciating this a lot.
My name is Brenda Serrano and I've had 2 kids come through the district. And I believe that in order to make change, you have to be involved. And I think it's important that we make change for everyone, not just for my kids, but for everybody else. That's why I'm here.
Lorena Chavez, board president.
Patty Cortese, Board Vice President.
Will Pardo, currently CSEA president, classified employees. Graduated from this district along with my 9 siblings, and I've been part of this community since Andrea Hill was brand new.
Good evening, Teresa Marquez, Associate Superintendent at Educational Services.
Hello, I'm Emily Sue, Student Governing Board President. I'm happy to be here to share some student insight within our community.
Bonley, Board Trustee.
Mark Adams, teacher at James Lick High School. And I'm here because I do believe in what the site is about. And I believe what our mission is. And I was talking to Thomas earlier, and I've been teaching for a couple of decades now. And I'm more enthusiastic about what we are today than when I started my career.
Thomas Brittendahl, teacher at Oak Grove High School, vice president for Eastside Teachers Association.
Vito Chiala, the principal at Overfeld High School, and I am here because I know that positive school climate is fundamental to student learning, student growth, student success.
Manuel Herrera, trustee, grew up in this community, graduated from Overfeld in the last century, the last millennium.
Hello, my name is Cassidy Noob. I'm a junior at Yerba Buena High School. I'm a part of the Youth Advisory Council. I'm the secretary for my school's Student Equity Council, and I believe to make a difference, you have to be in the room and take opportunities. I really wanted to be here today because I'm so passionate about social justice and making any impact I can. I think it's amazing that all of the students who were elected to be on this committee were elected in the first place. I think it's an amazing opportunity.
Welcome and go Warriors. Go Warriors.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Eddie Hernandez.
Okay, great. So thank you everybody for taking a moment to introduce yourselves. Again, apologies for that coming a little late. All right, so we did number 1, number 2, number 3. So who's showing out for number 3?
So that would be Tom and Vito. And number 3 is developing a clear and consistent consequences for disruptive behaviors and follow through.
All right, take it away.
Okay, thank you. So this one, of all the 4 that are on the paper here, seem to have the most consensus of any of the items in the survey. It was strongly suggested by not only staff, but also students and parents alike. on Friday, there was not a clear agreement as to what it looks like, but there was a clear agreement that it was important. I think there's a distinction that was also made on Friday that this is important both, for all students, but specifically for, I believe it was roughly 2% or so that Julio honed in on, and that it doesn't always look the same depending upon, well, that just goes into the nature that we didn't agree on what it actually looks like. So, just the time, I'll save the rest for the Q&A.
Yeah, I also, I think this one was the most strongly represented across the groups. And I think this one will be debated in the details. I like the idea of it being clear and consistent, but also well-known, understood in advance, so it can work as a deterrent as well as a positive behavior changer. I think, if I could editorialize, I would want to say, let's make sure it's research-based and that we're not just looking at consequences as the things we always used to do, but the things that we can do that are going to result in positive behavior change, that are going to build confidence in our ability to respond to negative behaviors and help them change so that we can have that positive school climate that's still humanizing for students while allowing them to understand how they have to be when they're on campus.
Who's number 4?
Cassidy and Vito, again, will speak on improving engagement with students.
So nearly 75% of students identified that the students who misbehave are misbehaving and causing issues and conflict are because they're bored. Boredom was the highest result regarding the question. I think students misbehave because of. I think that means we aren't meeting our students where they're at, and I think that we need to take a look back at our education system and see what's happening. We have to realize this generation is like none other before because we skipped at least 2 to 3 years of an education because we got it through Zoom on quarantine. We can't guarantee the quality of an education these students got during middle school or their first year of high school. Those years were integral for building how they were going to act in high school. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge some students are behind because they couldn't be held accountable during the pandemic when we were taking Zoom classes, and a lot of students didn't take it seriously. Some did, however, I think that's very, there's few of them, or at least a lower percentage. We also have to acknowledge that sometimes, as much as we love and support our teachers, they're not helping or supporting us. I know I have heard of a teacher, at least on my campus, which is Yerba Buena, who got fired because he wasn't able to meet students where they were at and help support them to garner and craft their education in that subject. We have to realize sometimes a teacher will say they are willing to help, but be extremely cold and unwelcoming when students don't understand curriculum. And we also have to look at the curriculum that students are not understanding. We have to take a look at our education system that hasn't been changed for the entirety of its existence. It's something important that we look at because students will suffer in silence, and when grades come around, they'll be scared to go home and with their report cards. We have to acknowledge that mental health plays a large part in how students react in the classroom. Less than 10% of students who are disruptive are doing it for the sake of it. And I think that's something we identified that was extremely important because as a teacher or as a student in the classroom, it feels like there are so many disruptive students when it's really just a small proportion. We need to identify and connect with those students to address the issues that are occurring. They may not be able to understand the curriculum, which is completely fine. If they're not able to understand, then we have to look back and see what's happening in their classroom as they're being taught, while also acknowledging if we only push off students to tutors, that's unfair to the people who are helping and tutoring them in a subject, because they're not learning from their teacher like they're supposed to. They're learning from a tutor who's explaining it after the fact. I think it's really important we take a look back at what has been happening in the past couple years and realize our students' mental health are really not the best. And we have to acknowledge that students have access to so much information in the world. We've had more access than generations before us through social media, and we are able to learn of conflicts happening overseas, hearing atrocities that are occurring in different continents, and realizing that plays a part on their mental health. I believe it was my freshman year of high school where World War III jokes were being at an all-time high. And I think that's concerning because people cope with trauma through humor. And if students are coping with the fact that our country might be at war soon with several others, that's concerning. We should be remembering these students in our campuses have so much access to everything that's going on in the world, especially when situations occur on campus. Students are some of the first people to hear what's happening. And I think that's something that we need to be mindful of.
And I want to thank Cassidy for sharing the student perspective on the importance of engagement. For us as staff, we recognize that as well, that we need to engage 100% of students if we want to meet our district's vision. And that means dealing with that lack of connection and connecting students to the teaching, to the curriculum, to the campus, so that they can see a pathway to a positive future through us, with us. And so I think it's fundamental that we address the needs that are listed here and that Cassidy just expressed.
Thank you. Nadia? Pass it back to you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to begin to review the results of survey. Is that working? Okay, that's a new one. And as you can see, we had quite a substantial number of folks responding. 66% completed the survey after they began to actually launch the survey. There are more surveys completed since the date of the 7th, but you can see here we have a very strong representation among families, students, and staff in terms of those completing the survey. So I'm going to take this one by one and walk you through. Next slide, please. This is sort of a net provider score on, as a starting point, asking everyone, we would like you to respond on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being not at all safe to 10 completely safe. Please indicate the extent to which you feel safe at work. So this is the staff response. We're going to look at staff responses first. And you can see the average overall is a 7. Go to the next. I feel my campus is a safe environment. You can see that the larger portion strongly agree or agree. Again, this is staff responses. Next shows the extent to which different ideas were selected by staff as an indicator of what disruptive events mean. So if you look at this particular item, the most popular response is that the students need more clear and consistent consequences for inappropriate behavior. And the next up is hire support personnel. Okay. So again, this is the staff response to whether they perceive the campus as a nurturing environment. Again, you'll see strongly agree and agree receive the largest number of votes. The staff see, if we could go back. Staff are saying that better supervision of students, more personnel that support the safety policies that are already in place. And again, as I said a moment ago, clear and consistent consequences for inappropriate behavior were the most popular responses there. What percent of students at your campus do you feel are involved in disruptive behavior? Overwhelming number of staff feel it's just about under 10%, 10% or under. And if we go to the next slide, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being absolutely no disruption to 10 maximum disruption, what's the extent to which these incidents create disruption on campus? And you see the response average is a 5 out of 10. Next slide. For those students who are involved in disruptive behaviors, the primary reasons are, and again, these two are the most common responses by staff: no consistent consequences for their actions or a lack of parental involvement. Common responses. And the next slide shows you. This is the prioritization from most to least effective that can be used to promote campus safety. And it's important to look here at the bottom because the numbers are somewhat close. But the most often selected as item 1 is use of security officers and police officers to support campus safety. And the second most common was increasing the number of supervision staff, like campus monitors or advisors. So those two that were ranked most often number 1. This is staff. We will give you some comparisons in a moment with the students and parents. Yeah. All right, next slide says, again, this is the prioritization of most to least effective that can be used to promote a positive campus climate. And they're, again, close in number, but if you look at the bottom, the percentages show you that the most common item ranked number 1 is the greater contact with students. And next would have been classrooms had supportive staff like tutors, paraeducators to assist students in completing assignments. Again, this is all staff response. And we asked staff, campus safety is my site administrator's number 1 priority. Again, you see the more common response is agree to strongly agree. Here's a question about which of the following activities do you see useful to support a positive campus climate? Most significant answer there was treating others with respect and dignity to support their sense of belonging. And close second would be creating opportunities for students to feel welcome. And very close third there is communicate with campus administrators about security issues.
Those of us who only have this document, how do we know what the rest of the sentence was when we have that?
Yes, it would be right.
Oh, it's down here. It's so tiny, you can see. Okay.
All right, and the next item. There's a question about collaboration with stakeholders. So here's the degree to which people feel they work collaboratively among stakeholders to create a safe and supportive environment. Again, staff largely agree, strongly agree. Next is just to make sure we share with you the percent of staff that answered within each of the different campuses that are part of the district. So you can see strong number each of the different campuses.
Just to be clear, that percent isn't the percent of staff at that school that took it, but percent of all respondents. So sometimes it's helpful to look here on the right as to the number of staff, such as Andrew Hill, which has a staff of, let's say, 130. So 60 staff, so a little less than 50% actually took the survey, but they make up 8.73 of all respondents. Okay, of staff.
Here you see the classification of the respondents in the staff pool of responses. So by far the most common participant are those who are certified. It's classified in the course management. Here we are looking at the demographics of the participants among staff. And you can see the percent of responses, but the total, this is percent of responses in total, and then the numbers. So African American, 14 members. That's 2% of the population that answered the survey. All right, so here are some important comparisons among different campuses and among the different constituents that answered. In this slide, what we're looking at is the extent to which people feel the campus is a safe environment, and you're looking at the level of agreement with a color coding of each campus represented in the bar graph that you see. So you can see a majority have indicated they agree, and you can also see that different campuses are represented in this particular spread of the color codes that are here. Just as a simple observation, sometimes a school is represented to a great degree. That's because there are a lot of people at that school. So more participants from that campus completed the survey.
Is there a slide that breaks up the school itself with the spectrum of strongly?
Not in this particular deck, but it is.
That'd be really interesting to see which schools they agree or strongly agree that
Is something that can be generated, but it's a additional slide. So let's go to the next slide. I think this is going to be very helpful as well. So this is a comparison between students and parents who perceive the campus as a safe environment. And you can see students and parents overwhelmingly do see this campus as safe. The child is in a safe environment. Below, you're looking at the results by language, and they are certainly in parallel with what you see in the English dominant survey. This is the students on this side and the parents are on this side. So and then the next slide, this is showing the response by staff. To give you a little bit of a, most staff agree. This is a nurturing environment. If we go to the next slide, here are the student and parents' responses. And you can see again, the majority of students agree, strongly agree, and parents agree, or strongly agree. And among the different language groups, those responses are in parallel.
The distinction there is between state and you don't have to.
Yes, there were two separate questions in the survey. One was about whether the campus feels safe, and the other is about whether it is nurturing. Task force felt that those are two different experiences. It might be safe, but not nurturing. It could be nurturing, but not safe. Two separate items for that. The next item, here's the staff responses to disruptive incidents on campus suggests there's a need for, and you can see the breakdown among the different campuses. The one that had the most significant response or the largest number of responses was clear and consistent consequences for inappropriate behavior. Go to the student and parents responses. You can see I'm sorry. Yes. And here's one more for the staff responses. For those students who are involved in disruptive behaviors, again, the two most common responses were lack of parental involvement, no consistent consequences for their actions. You can see the breakdown by campuses. Next, you can see, again, staff responses for those students who are involved in disruptive behaviors. The primary reasons are two most common were no consistent consequences for their actions and a lack of parental involvement. And I think now we have the comparisons. So here's the students' response. I think students misbehave because of, and as Cassidy said a moment ago, boredom was the most common response, as well as no consistent consequences for their actions. Among parents, the most common response was no consistent consequences for their actions and limited support for their psychosocial, emotional health needs. So slightly variant here around what the options were, but there's some consistencies in the responses between staff, students, and parents. Again, a reminder, please prioritize the following measures from most to least effective that can be used to promote campus safety. Again, remember the most common one selected first was the use of security officers and or police officers to support campus safety. The second most common was increasing the number of supervision staff. Now, if we look at what students and parents said in the next slide, here you have a comparison between what the students ranked as first and what the parents did with this overall ranking. A little hard to see the numbers here, but for students, the most common item that was selected, number one, is providing additional support programs for students and their families. And if we go to the top here, for parents, it's increasing the number of supervision staff. But when you look at the overall score of importance, again, there are some interesting differences between what students perceive and what parents perceive. The last item there is increased interventions and appropriate programs for students struggling academically and personally. That had a fairly high score of 3.12. See, the high score for the parents was increasing the number of supervision staff like campus monitors and advisors. Go to the next slide. Just again, a reminder of how the staff responded about the campus safety being their site administrators' #1 priority. This is a breakdown by all of the different campuses. The overwhelming number agreed or strongly agreed. Go to the next slide, you'll see, I think there is a safety concern on campus. If I think there is a safety concern on campus, I have a trusted adult that I can go to and report my concerns. Students, again, strongly agree or agree is the more common response. Parents, campus safety at my child's school is my site administration's #1 priority. See the Most common responses, strongly agree, agree. See, there are parallels with other language groups that answered this particular item. So here are the staff responses to which of the following activities will you use to support a positive campus climate? This is by campus, and you can see the 4 items that are represented in the color bars are creating opportunities for students to feel welcome, communicate with campus administrators about security issues, engage in professional development opportunities to engage positively with all students, treat other students with respect and dignity to support their sense of belonging. And in general, at each campus, if you look at all of the different graphs, the more common response is treating others with respect and dignity, support their sense of belonging. Slide. Here is again a reminder of how the staff prioritized from most to least effective what can be done to promote a positive campus. And you can see the more common items are greater contact with students ranking first. And the second is classrooms had support staff or tutors, para-educators to assist students to complete assignments. If we go to the next slide, we can see how again, staff responded to whether the site works collaboratively across all stakeholders to create a safe and supportive campus. Next slide will show. The last bit here is the SRO survey that had been. This is the results of the SRO survey that had been conducted a few months ago. And again, this is just showing you the participation among the different sites. 839 responses to this. We go to the next slide.
Could we just have, Thomas, could you give us like a 30-second where this came from and just, because this was a separate survey from earlier that came from.
Yeah, this was a separate survey that was released back in August. That what preceded the survey questions that you're about to see is a definition of what an SRO was. It was defined as a law enforcement officer trained to work on high school campuses. So that's what everyone would have seen before they took this survey. And it was, well, actually, Glenn, does that do the job?
It's just a couple of slides here.
Participation by site, and then SRO at my site. If not, I don't know. Next level of nuances. I support SRO at every site. Some sites I don't know. So that, dear board, was the whirlwind tour of a survey that the group went over last Thursday night and did some findings and saw some areas of agreement, some areas where there's valuations in different areas. And based on all the issues that they've raised and all the conversations and world cafes and good things like that, kind of there was a confluence around those 4 ideas that our friends talked about in the middle. And so I don't know if you have questions, one regarding the data or just what we saw, or questions, or if you have just questions for the group on where the task force and some of the conversations and where it might go next.
I missed a couple minutes there, but I just generally want to say how much I appreciate the work that was done with this survey. Who was mostly involved in designing it? It's quite a work, quite a product.
They worked under the auspices of anonymity or not, but I was one group started to work on it, and then it was taken to at the first task force. The task force had the opportunity to give some feedback, and then our team then entered it into the
a lot of group
to the mechanism.
Intelligence and wisdom went into it. It's
Yeah.
comprehensive. It's very informative. It gets us right beyond, speculation and opinion, gives us more data and answers a lot of questions, and I'm just appreciating it very much. And the question on the table now is,
What questions do you have for the group?
start with what in what in some of the feedback I had heard before, one thing that kept coming up was additional actions with regard to facilities like fences or ways of, containing. Did that come up in anything? Is that an issue, and is it represented anywhere?
I'd say it's not represented in the surveys, but I would say it is still an issue at several sites.
Wasn't the teachers.
I would say that from our standpoint, especially because of the campus monitors, they mentioned the fact that it's really hard. When you take it, for example, Independence, how difficult it is to try to monitor that campus when you got so many openings that the public can just walk in campus. So yes, that was brought up us about putting, some people asked about that, not in the survey, but people at some of the meetings I went to, they asked about, is it possible to put, some kind of, they said barricades, fences, gates to make it harder for people to come on campus.
So my understanding of the intent of this table being convened with all board members is that there will be some recommendations that emerge that reflect the kind of consensus understanding of this group. And so I would imagine that we should start tracking that as part of what is going to inevitably be a part of the big policy framework conversation that gets to the regular board meeting. Not let it drop off. Because I did hear it often before we started this process.
When you say I heard it often, what do you mean by it?
I mean, emails, conversations, I mean, facilities, ways of, enclosing the physical campus sites.
Right. And that is something that we've heard, and it was, to Mr. Adams' point, it was part of the questions here, so we do have data on that as well. Yes, it was part of a
Oh, it's
question.
just not part of this.
It was an option there. It was just, I think when we shared the survey, we pointed out just some of the highest ranking responses, but we didn't go through every single one. So you have it here for your reference to go through in more detail.
Okay.
But it was here, and
Oh, so it's tracking.
yeah.
And one last thing for now is, what is the general sense of where the strongest disagreements are going to remain strong disagreements for the full board in a regular board meeting to engage with?
I would say there's an opportunity, and I invite everybody here to answer this question because everybody was part of these conversations. But I want to bring us back to the 4 things that were brought up because at the very beginning, because those were headlines. After the task force saw the results and as they engaged in conversation, these were the things that stood out. And this is where there was like more resonance. People had an opportunity to put like little sticky notes or the little red stickers, say, okay, I agree. This is where there was the most energy. And I see, I mean, as we heard through some of our presenters, there's variance opinion. There's like still more to dig in within this. And maybe this is an opportunity to say, okay, within these areas, what are we thinking? What are we feeling so that we can, get people's perspective, their own perspective, but also their experience in the task force and what they feel that they heard.
Okay, as we meet first, second, third meeting, whatever number of meetings we're going to have, I'm going to want to come out of this really educated on what those opposing perspectives are around X issue, Y issue, what have you. I want to learn,
Yeah. And our hopes are that this space today will help us get even clearer on where we need to dig further and what needs to happen in this task force coming up.
May I add to that? When the committee met, it was with the emphasis of highlighting areas and not fixes. So the idea is not solutions. We're looking at what the issues are and then the solutions. That's a whole lot of thing way after. So I think that that helps figure out, we were not looking for solutions. We were trying to highlight what we thought from the different perspectives were the issues that we were facing.
Got it, got it. That answers it in a big way. Thank you.
Yeah, and to address this question about, to address this question about, campus security, perimeter fencing, et cetera. One of the challenges with a survey like this is that it depends on how you're impacted. I know most of the teachers at my site feel perfectly safe in their secure classrooms, some of which are behind gates, but I know that our PE department doesn't feel secure. And I know that others who interact in areas of a campus that are not as secure, they would answer that they need more fencing, security, et cetera. So that's one of the challenges with that question. Most teachers will say that they feel safe because they're situated in a very nice part of the campus.
And to answer your question, Mr. Herrera, you said which is what probably the most contentious. That probably was the most contentious is security on campus. How do we provide that security? Do we do it for our own people? Do we do it with police officers? And that's where the big everyone, I mean, you got sometimes you have 70%, 30%. Okay, it's pretty obvious. It's overwhelming in favor. But when it's 50-50, which way do you think?
Well, I'll just say it's not 50-50 in the CSEA survey. In the ESTA survey, it's not even close. It's surprising, but it's not close at all.
Yeah.
And I would say that I saw your survey and to me, your questions were a little one-sided.
Cassidy?
To touch off where Mr. Adams left off.
Can you speak closer to the mic?
To touch off of what Mr. Adams was saying, we've identified as a committee that students, staff, and parents are tending to lean towards the opinion that they feel safe on campus. But that's really good and progressive, but we also have to remember that just because they feel safe doesn't mean in the back of their mind they're thinking of incidents that have occurred in the past and are going to school with anxiety in the back of their mind, remembering these tragic national events that have occurred on campuses and have occurred with little laws in taking place to protect these students from this occurring again. Students tend to feel safe in general at campus, I think is a fair statement to make. However, after incidents occur, I think is when we should be asking them if they feel safe on campus again, because it'll get there after an incident occurs, not even in our school district, but nationally. After tragedy strikes, it's good to interview students and ask how are they doing, because I know personally after watching a documentary on Uvalde, I felt really unsafe at school, and I think that students' concern of safety on campus differs a lot, especially after they are reopened to incidents that are occurring. Even if they're small or literally states away, it'll still have an impact on students. So I think we should be asking students to get an appropriate response if they feel safe on campus at different parts of the school year, and have multiple multiple pieces of data to look at regarding how students feel on campus and how parents feel, because when it's quiet, no one will say they're afraid of the dark. But
can we go back to the slide where there's a differing in opinion between the students, the parents, and the staff, the one with the arrows, the lines? Yeah, do the one before, It's the one with the lines, yeah. this is something that I tell you, I was sitting there when we did this, when we looked at it, and it did not dawn on me that, and this is not to say this is for every student, but if you look at the student's perspective, I think to a certain extent, they're trying to tell you that, yes, they want to feel safe at school, but they want to approach it from the prevention side. They don't want to approach it from, I feel safe on campus because there's a security person there and that's the only reason I feel safe. And I never saw this when we did it. It just hit me now. If you look at the student side, what their priorities are is fix it before it breaks. And as parents and staff, because we have to be there, we want to do that, but we also want to make sure that in the moment, we are also safe. So I just thought it was very interesting.
That's a great observation. What would help me is if, like right now, we're discussing what this data means or could mean. If there was a narrative that was generated with the kinds of observations that are being offered about this data. You know, I don't have to read it and extract or make my own notes, or have somebody can just do the work of generating a narrative that captures, you know, what's being indicated by the data.
Go ahead, Thomas.
There's a problem with that. With some of these questions are perfectly fine. When we're talking about this data here, there's a problem that happens when trying to formulate a narrative. Because when you look at this data, all of these 5 points were placed there already. No one who took the survey had the ability to basically agree or disagree that any of them should be on there. So when we look at the responses here, there's absolutely nothing that indicates someone agrees that all of these things are important or disagrees that any of them are important. We're all for this data, we're operating on the assumption that people think that these 5 things should be there. But because no one was given an option to place things on there,
Or just an open-ended.
correct. And since they're limited to these 5, and there could be other things that people say, forming a narrative off of these prioritization questions is problematic. I think you could off of some of the more clear singular questions.
Well, I think you could say it's limited in this way.
Go ahead, Angeles.
I think we also talked about like having more voices because the survey doesn't really represent, we don't know like which students took it. So there was conversations of like, what else can we do, right? So I think that's something that we should also talk about is like, what else can we do besides the survey, right? If we can do like listening circles or like any other like student input or gather different data to help us more.
I really appreciate your point, and it would be interesting what further would be generated with listening circles or kind of a form of a focus group where there's interactive dialogue to go a little deeper. But in terms of a survey as a methodology and an instrument, this is a great help. And the number of responses really give it a lot of validity. Because if everybody responded, given these percentages and numbers of responses, it would come out very close to the same in terms of a survey.
So,
Thank you. I first want to thank the committee for all the efforts and the brain power and putting in the effort in this. If I may make a couple of requests in the future for the presentation portion part, if we can have pages, that would be super helpful so we can reference particular pages. Yes, numerical number would be fantastic. The other thing is, I believe what Cassidy and Mark Adam have said earlier is how it impacts you will influence how you believe on the ranking of the scale. If you are at YB, which I believe you only have a fence, the issue of fence is not going to be important to you. You already have it, right? Whereas another school, maybe at James Lick or others say, you know, maybe we care more about fencing. How that affect you may impact how. So if we can have category by this way by the school, that is super helpful because if I can see how James Lick feel, independent high school, so and so on particular issue. Because when we address issue, we are not necessarily have to do a blanket entire districts. We may address differently based on the nature of your campus. And finally, there are things that are some pages which I, as a starting point, I don't know if this help you at all, but it's talking about responding on your campus safety from 1 to 7, and you take the average. When I say average, I don't know, is that mean, mode, or median? You add everything up and divide it by 10, which absolutely doesn't help me. That you feel unsafe, it doesn't matter if the other person feels safe or not, because it doesn't change who you may feel about particular issues at your particular school. If we can categorize, break it down by school, and that help us in understanding, because we break down by every single other category: parents, students, and parents, students, and staff.
Thank you. I'm curious if anybody from the task force like wrote anything that stood out to them. Or if we go back to the 4 headlines, given that those were the ones that there was the most energy around after we had the conversation around this survey. I do want to share a few that stood out to me. There was this one, I say this when I heard like, oh yes, like these were the moments where I heard that. I think when we were talking about James Lick and we're talking about health professional embedded with advisors, that really resonated with folks on a proactive lens. And I want to say James Lick, Underhill, and Independence have that. Don't quote me, but I think that's what it is for sure, James Lick. That really resonated with folks. And I do want to acknowledge that that's going to a solution, but just, something I heard. Consistency and follow through doesn't necessarily mean harsh, not harsh. It's just like being really clear, being really consistent, and making sure that there's follow through. So there is a difference there. And proactive. How do we prevent? And I think, Vito, you alluded to this. How effective are the strategies and things that we're going to be executing on, or saying we're going to do research-based, so on and so forth. And I put down follow through again, a full range of consequences, building relationships, because without it, you can't restore. And I think I heard the headline of relationships over and over again. So a lot of proactive, a lot of just consistency and follow through and whatever it is. But I don't know if there were any of those things that resonated with folks, or that there were some takeaways. Go ahead, Mr. Brittenthal.
Yeah, I would say there was a little more. I want to acknowledge that there was absolutely disagreement when it comes to the developing clear and consistent consequences for disruptive behaviors. There was a lively discussion that happened on Friday. And I'll try to summarize it, and someone can always chime in if they think I've missed something. It stemmed from the basic premise would be that we should have more significant consequences for a variety of behaviors. Some examples would be ones that are listed in Ed Code. The premise would be that all the good positive behavior stuff that the district is doing is great, and it should continue to happen. But to go along with it, there needs to be disincentives that go along with restorative elements, with positive behavior elements, to actually provide a sufficient disincentive for kids to not do certain things. One idea is just something as simple as, if it's an Ed Code violation, well, there's nothing wrong with having a detention and a reflective essay for a first occurrence. The discussion evolved to the point where, for serious misbehaviors, that the involuntary transfer process is underutilized by the district. And there was other pushback on the involuntary transfers, was, to my knowledge, twofold. One, that it's not possible for freshmen and sophomores, which I disagree with. And secondly, that the mechanism itself, I'm not sure what the proper terminology would be, what the terms used, but it just wouldn't be beneficial, I guess would be a generalized way of saying it. And I think that's, to my knowledge, well, actually, before I sum it up, or before I wrap it up, there was a moment in the discussion where a poll was given by a show of hands, where there was raise your hand if you agree with this side, raise your hand if you agree with that side. And I didn't actually count, but there was a significant amount of hands raised for the more significant consequences. And I'll wrap that up there and let some other people speak.
That's the kind of area I want to drop people into, having understood. If I had been in that.
Yeah, that's why I'm inviting this.
And I also wanted to ask, because when Vito spoke, and mentioned it should be research-based and, you know, just about consequences, and then I couldn't keep up with my notes. But you clarified it a little bit beyond saying not just consequences. You said it should X, Y, Z, and I missed it. Do you recall?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, I think what I was getting at is that we tend to think of consequences in a traditional historical sense, and we should look at what research says actually positively helps change student behavior while humanizing them, as opposed to maybe some of the consequences that were used in the past that devalued certain groups of students and made them not feel connected to schools, especially if we're trying to connect all students. And I want to go back to what you said earlier. I think we have pretty good agreement around these things, but the details about how we implement them is where the debates are going to happen. But my big takeaway from the first two meetings is that we are all in this together for the right reasons. Like, we're all totally invested in Eastside and what Eastside should be. It doesn't mean that our perspectives are uniform at all in how we should solve the problems, but we're all in the room together to do the work. And I think even trying to provide a narrative for some of this data, like that's what we have to hash out in the committee. And that's going to be the fun of the future meetings, I think, for us. At least for me, I love engaging in the positive debates when the outcome is going to be a better experience for our students.
Thank you.
Vito, can I ask you just to repeat the first part of what you said? You didn't quite hear the first part. You were talking about practices in the past that devalued certain students. You were talking about research-based.
Yeah, I mean, we know right now that there are research-based consequences or responses to behavior that actually positively change behaviors. And we also know that research doesn't value some of the consequences we used to give in the past. And I think even Thomas saying a detention with a reflective essay, that's not what we used to do. Detention used to be you're locked in a room and you can't work and you have to sit quietly for 45 minutes because it was modeling a practice that our society used. And so I think looking at things like reflective essays and opportunities for students to reflect on their behaviors so they change them. But I'm not the researcher around that. I've read a lot of the research, and I think that's what we need to do before we jump into this is historically what consequences are, and we just need to go back to that.
Thank you for that. So Cassidy and then Patty.
So at our last meeting, the committee was there was definitely some very pro and contra beliefs, and I think that's really good because it gives side to both stories. However, one of the things we as a committee discussed was the potential and the knowledge of these students who are wanderers, and how they know how to do stuff that isn't extremely conventional or prioritized in our education system. So we were discussing how if these students aren't willing to learn or in a traditional sense in a classroom, could we have them share with the rest of the quote unquote wanderers their skills and learn to teach these students how to do things that they themselves are experts in, and share their knowledge with their fellow students. I think that was something that was a really good idea, considering if we can't get students to engage in our curriculum, we can at least have them learn something and have them be productive with their time. I know I personally brought up the idea of, if we can't have these wanderers sit and learn algebra 3 in a classroom, can we have them learn how to sew or learn basic life skills that will help them out in the future? So if nothing, if they don't gain a traditional education at school, they are gaining basic life skills that every person needs in if they're learning how to fix a car, change oil, learn how to sew up a hole in their clothes, they're learning something, and it's better than having them just sit in a bathroom and wait till 5 minutes till the period ends. That is something that I really think we should do with these wanderers who aren't particularly willing to learn the traditional subjects, because if they're not interested in one thing, who knows, they could be interested in something else and it could end up helping them in the future. And it's something that I think is a good idea, as well as when we're thinking about punishment and disciplinary actions, what groups are being affected the most? This is purely personal for my campus. However, my campus is nearly 50-50 Latino Vietnamese, and the students who are being forgotten about and who we aren't serving on our campus are the Latino students who aren't caught up. So when we're looking at disciplinary actions, we also have to look at the equity and the rates for each demographic, because if we change the system and we don't address these issues that we've had in the past, they're just going to keep reoccurring, and we're just going to keep failing certain demographics of our communities that are large, that make up a large percentage. And that's something I think we should also address when looking at disciplinary actions.
Thank you, Cassidy. Cortese?
I might retract my question after hearing Vito's response, but I'm just tossing this out there as a brainstorming thing, okay? Wondering if when it comes to consequences, if we are able, or if we would even want to offer a choice for our students. And what has me ask that question is an experience I had many years ago. I was tasked with the issue of creating something called a neighborhood accountability board. So this was working with juvenile probation, and we recruited volunteers from the neighborhood to hear cases for first-time offenders in lieu of traditional, getting in the system and the typical being booked and charged and dealing with the punishments and consequences of that system. And the philosophy of the neighborhood accountability boards was based on a triangle, and said that justice would be served if the victim is made whole, the community is made whole, and the offender themselves are made whole. And so juvenile individuals who came to the court were presented with an option. Do you want to go through the traditional court, have your case heard and rendered and typical punishment or consequences, or would you want to go to this neighborhood accountability board and create a contract that would address those three things? And then at the end of that, if you complied with the contract, then the record would be expunged automatically. And I appreciated the fact that the young people who participated in that process made a choice to sign up for this contract, and then were held accountable for fulfilling fulfilling the contract. But the contract was something that was mutually created by the board and the young person. And they were challenging things that people were being asked to do, or that they agreed to do. Maybe could be anything from writing a letter of apology, making remuneration for whatever, if they stole something, or if it was graffiti on a fence, then they would spend weekends painting over graffiti or something, and they tried to make it connected. And I don't know if we've thought of anything like that or if any, that has any application here or what, but I was moved by the students who, or the young people who I saw, their willingness to take accountability for their actions because they were given a chance to choose that path.
Go ahead, Emily. And then Van.
After this discussion, I know like relationships between students and teachers have been brought up a lot, what providing additional support like for the student. And I do completely agree with that, but I think that at some point, like preventative measures and teachers obviously like care about us, right? Teachers, as a student, I've felt that my teachers have always made it an effort to care about their students' well-being, but I've just heard like a lot of teachers recently talking about, oh, like, I'm not sure if how much more I can do given my time to like keep making sure that everybody in my class and everybody is doing okay. But I think Cassidy then brought up a great point that if you're struggling in a certain class, or let's say you're just not she was talking about how you're just not like fit and you're just not let me think about this. So she was describing how like a sewing class or a cooking class, we could add additional classes for these students to take who are not like who are able to benefit their other skills like that they're using outside in their real life rather than just in class. And I think that that was like one of the greatest points made throughout this discussion, because like I do agree that if you're struggling in class and your teachers just won't go the extra mile to support you, like you have nothing better to do, right? Like you just can't keep up at school. And it's not the student's fault and it's not the teacher's fault. And so if there were like more measures for these students to have other things to succeed in and try out other paths rather than just like their academics, I think that would solve a lot of the issues of like students who can't succeed in just one like aspect of school.
Go ahead, Trustee Lee.
I look at the report as of November 7, 2023. The total response is only 3,858. Family member respond 1,461. Student respond only 1,496 respond. Staff is 901. That number is really trigger me. We have about 22,000 students, and it's not even 10% of the student respond. What's going on here? Do they care? The parent care? We do have the safety issue here. But if we don't care, how could we get those respond that's not significantly to really tell us, stop willing to respond, but student and parent, did not respond accordingly. So I was wondering, how do we have the best result? Because when we've accomplished our task of safety issue, and when we finish, to find the best solution, but the solution might not look into only about less than 10% of student respond.
Thank you.
So that's something that's really bothered me. Looking to that. And I have one thing is the response of the staff responded, looking in I don't know what page it is, but to say, which of following activity, excuse me, will you use to support a positive campus climate? In that 4 category is create opportunity for students to feel welcome. The second one, communicate with campus administrators about security issue. The third issue is engage in professional development opportunity. Yes, that's like to engage positively with all students. And the last one, treat others with respect and dignity to support their sense of belonging. Based on this this graph, I can see that the last part, the last issue or the last bullet, treat others with respect and dignity to support a sense of belonging, is the longest, when the highest response. So I was wondering that, are we all on the same pace? Are we looking to the same thing? We treat each other with respect and dignity. This is a staff response, but I don't know about student. I don't know about parents. Would they feel the same way? So how can we communicate and get the same, might not be the same response, but the same question in order to achieve what we want in terms of, climate as the safety. That's how I think. But thank you all of the team and everyone that contributed to the survey. But in order for us to look into a different, bigger picture, we're gonna have to go down and see why that the student did not respond, why parent did not respond. Staff, maybe with 2/3, but is that really significantly what we're gonna drive to the conclusion? That's what my question.
Thank you for that, Trustee Lay. Point taken. I'm all about as much voice as possible. I also learned a lot about surveys, hearing how surveys work, especially given the time and why we even decided to have a survey, which is to make sure that beyond the task force, which is a good amount, close to 50 people representative across different groups, made sure that their voices were at the table. But this further gave more information as to where people across the community were at. So I don't know, Maria, if you could speak to a little bit about surveys, how they work, where we landed, just so that others can have that context as well.
Sure. Oh, would you like? Very simply, it is always frustrating when you put out a survey and you only see a certain percent of the population respond, but that's quite normal. Even in corporate America, when employees are surveyed about how they feel about their workplace and their captive audience, sometimes people feel really great if you get 35% of that audience responding. So in this instance, one of the factors that has played a role in response rates is that people's emails change. People don't update their email, or they might have a limited access to that email. And so you do get some variance as to whether or not people will respond simply because they haven't. And I know that your internal staff has worked very hard to make sure that the link was sent out, and it was sent out with 2 additional reminders, 2 text messages to remind people to take it. And it's possible that in this instance, one other factor is that you had recently done a survey, and it can make for people to feel, oh, I already answered that. Why would I answer it again? So there's a lot of reasons why survey design is something that is a science, and it takes real effort to make sure that the design of the survey and the questions don't lead the person to ask, to answer in a certain way. And to clarify, we always try to provide what's in essence a net provider score around a range of 1 to 10 to let us see really truly where are people feeling about a specific issue, not just asking them, do you strongly agree, disagree, neither agree nor disagree, or what have you. Those are common tactics to try and get as much variance in the responses as possible. So there's always a blend of questions and guide the task force in adopting.
Thank you for that, Maria. Trustee Herrera.
Yeah, I'm appreciating Trustee Von's observation about the number of students being what you said, trustee Vaughn, about 10% of the student body of 21,000 and so many, you know, what have you. And yet, what the responses we did receive from students are indicative and informative and point to what it would be most likely if double that number responded or triple that number responded. We're now in the universe of the student mindset. And the way we could go deeper, I think, is Brenda, is it Brenda? Yeah, our parent at the table here, she said, you know, we could also hold listening circles. I call them focus groups, but, well, that was Angeles? Excuse me. I appreciate that suggestion because it is one way to flush it out, just to go a little deeper. And again, if you take a random sample across the student body in whatever way you do the methodology for random, and get them in a room and get them in a discussion and dialogue. And what you're looking for is not how this person feels, but what emerges by way of commentary, observations, you know, what have you. You just go deeper than the survey instrument allows you to, and extract that to put into this process. You could do it with students, you could do it with parents, you could even do it with any other group, administrators, teachers, classified, so on. But probably the area to really bolster it is with the student and parent perspectives. What more could we learn in a listening circle?
I know you did, but did you have your hand up as well? Cool. Sorry, I'm trying to get a pulse of who has their hands raised. So, okay, Angeles and then Do. Sorry, yeah.
I just had a comment as well. As like we talk about the 10% or like the 20% of students who are like roaming around or who are not, you know, getting into trouble, different things. But do we even have them in the room, right? To ask those questions to make sure like they are part of this space as well. I think that's one of the questions that I also want to ask. Are they here, right?
Wow, that's even more.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you for that. Do.
I just make one quick note. I think when we talk about 10%, I know you're concerned that the number is not high enough. But I think when you're talking about scientific surveys that they often do, and there's an article in Scientific Americans all the way back in 2004, where it's only 1,000 people. Yet when they do a survey that reflected to 260 at the time, 260 million Americans when they're surveying, and it's only 1,000 people, and yet they was able to arrive at a 3% margin of error. I'm dropping that article with our superintendent so he can forward to the board. So I do not violate the Brown Act when send it to you.
Go ahead, Mr. Adams is next. Yes. Sorry if I miss anybody. It's not intentional. I'm trying to make sure I see everybody.
Yeah, the surveys are very valuable. And we've had this safety task force survey, the Panorama also had a survey. It'd be interesting to see how that shapes the narrative, and the ESTA had the survey. But there's also other data that we might want to use for creating the narrative. One would be the absentee rate. We know that it spiked after COVID. You know, it'd be interesting to see, has it plateaued, is it declining, or does it continue to represent an issue? Because that absenteeism reflects directly on student engagement. It also reflects on whether students are receiving tier 1 supports. If they're not in class, they're not receiving a lot of the tier 1 support. So it'd be interesting to look at the absentee rate, see what's happened over the last few years. And then the suspension rate. I don't even know what it is in our district, but it'd be interesting to see what is the suspension rate, the expulsion rate, and then with fights, if they could be broken down between fights and assaults. So a fight, 2 people square up, and that's one thing. But an assault, you know, when a group of people attack a student, it'd be interesting to see how many of those we have. And then with drug use, it's a lot of it's anecdotal, but we find a lot of drug paraphernalia, wrappings, et cetera, on the campus. And it does serve as a gauge. I don't know how accurate of a gauge, but it's quite alarming what teachers and custodians are finding being left behind. And that could be used to shape part of the narrative. I know at James Lake, it was interesting. Some of the roamers did participate in group discussions. And their responses were very unexpected in some regards. And some of their responses may have been just in the moment. One of the students, a roamer who was attacked, I mean, he stated in a public meeting, he thought that we needed police. Now, that may have just been his feeling at that moment because he had been just recently attacked. I don't know if he sustains that view, but it would be interesting to hear from the roamers and wanderers. And I know that one of the things that they're trying to do is just engage those students. And I know they're even having, I think one of the social workers just ask them, why are you not in class? And the results, we do have some data from those engagements that they're having with that population.
Thank you for sharing that. Mr. Pardo?
I just have a question for administration. So we've had a couple of these meetings now. And we talked to the board about the issues that we see, what we see the community, what they think the issues are, and some possibilities of what they can do about it. Are we going to have another meeting where we actually discuss some solutions as a group we recommend, or is that something that the administration will come up with and recommend to the board?
I see that Julio's moved into a role of facilitator. Thank you for that. Fantastic. Because one of our to-dos tonight, we have another task force meeting before our next board meeting. Let me go back in time here. All right, so we're here on, what day is today? November 13th, right? So then we'll have another that grade dot is that we'll have another task force meeting, and that's for what our task force is just like, from what you've heard, from what we've lifted up in front of you. We know that we can't just drill right into directly into one item, but is there a general sense of some of the items that have been presented that you want us to do just kind of a further study, a deeper analysis, and then also start generating some idea of what a positive East Side response could be in working with these students. So that's our ask for tonight, is for you to give us some direction and where we'd like to pursue first. It'd be fun to say we're going to wrap this all up by December 14th. No, the work will continue. But we definitely want to structure it towards where the board is. And so we'd love to, before you all leave tonight, is to get some input from you on shaping our next task force meeting and shaping the work.
Go ahead.
Yes, Board
Trustee Lee.
President, I just want to ask quickly, our student representative here tonight, how would they feel, or how would they look into this, task force? Do we have a couple representative student?
Yeah, both Cassidy and Fernando have been part of the task force
and
actively.
Emily
And
might-
Emily has been a part of the task force, but there's been a handful of students that have been part of the task force specifically.
On, and maybe Emily has an outside, but
It's
you know,
just student
beside this,
perspective.
these two student, I'd like to hear from you. Yeah. Yeah, I know. but
3, 4 more?
Just want to hear
Yeah.
from them.
I think you want to hear from the students,
Yes.
like their perspective.
Yes, the perspective.
Fernando? You have any?
What was your question again?
When we have the task force, why is we have a low response from the student on those task force?
I feel like it could be several factors. First of all, there's like, of course, the lack of attention it's garnered. Like, I feel like with this meeting or this survey, especially, not a lot of people actually realize that it was occurring because there was no announcement at my school or really in the district that there was a survey going out, like the panorama survey. At least in my school, there was a class or during homework for mine, where they said, hey, there's a survey going on, we'd like you to take it. But for this survey in particular, there was no like announcement or reminder to call to attention that there was a survey. It was only up to if you did actually check your email. And I don't feel like a lot of students really do check their emails because they're just busy. And if they do, it's probably just flooded with all sorts of things, like for assignments, for schoolwork, for all these other things that aren't related to the survey. And it also could be that just as again, like technical limitations, they don't have access to that technology, or maybe their Gmail change or they just don't check their emails enough to actually see the survey. So I feel like those could really affect the amount of students that actually see and take the survey.
Thank you.
But, well, since we have you here, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm gonna put you on the spot. As you think about your experience on these task force meetings that we've had, is there anything that you would want to make sure that everyone here would hear from the student perspective? Just any opinion that you have to share here based on the whole conversation, could be any.
I feel like with consequences, it is highlighted here, but if they were defined, I feel like students would actually learn to stop misbehaving, because if they realize that their actions have consequences and those consequences can really just affect their lives and not just, it's just something that happens, they can ignore, they would actually stop doing all these issues that are occurring within these campuses. I know from like what I've heard, there's not really a lot of enforcement when it comes to like say detention or tardy sweeps. A lot of students can just ignore that and there's not really a lot of repercussions. So I feel like if we do define what happens when you break those rules and ignore disciplinary action that we're taking to enforce these rules, there would be a lot more or a lot less just behavioral issues.
I'm hearing clarity on the consequences and follow through.
Definitely, yeah. I feel like those two particularly, I mean, of course, there's like a bunch of other factors, but I feel like those two would definitely help to get the students to realize that their actions have consequences, and if they don't follow through, then things could actually happen to enforce those.
Cassidy, would you add anything?
Okay, sorry. It was green the entire time. Everyone was speaking, so it's like, something I think that's important for staff to understand is students see favoritism when it comes to disciplinary action. Students see their teachers essentially giving up and just dealing with the fact that there are always going to be disruptive students in their classes. I know for me, I've taken 3 AP classes, and 2 of those classes, there were groups who are just disruptive, and at a certain point our teacher ended up giving up and let them be disruptive. And as soon as something else had occurred or someone else, a part of this group who was constantly being disruptive, did something, they were given a harsher punishment, and the "I'm disappointed in you" card pulled on them, which as a student doesn't feel equitable, because students who teachers deem have higher potential in some cases feel like they don't want to do anything anymore because they're gonna be hammered down harder than their peers. And I think it's important to understand that, because disciplinary actions aren't consistent, and students will see their teacher give up on them or focus on one particular group of students and decide to give up on that class because they don't feel like their teacher sees value in them and sees value in trying to harness their skills as a student to achieve more. Something I was looking up that was completely separate from the task force, however, is that high school dropouts are 8 times more likely to be incarcerated during graduation time. And I find that concerning, and I'm hoping that our school district is doing something and trying to make sure that none of their students can be accounted for in that statistic, because it's really concerning. And I think we don't really give students as much of a chance as they deserve, because if I know my campus, if you're failing a class, you're just gonna be hammered to attend tutoring sessions, which some students don't want to because they're embarrassed due to the fact that they can't understand the material or their teacher moves too quickly and gives unclear instructions on what's supposed to be happening. So they get left behind and they're only hammered to their only actions being taken to amend this is go to tutoring. Students have a larger voice and see what's happening in the classroom day to day. They have very smart perspectives, and I think it's extremely important to constantly value and listen to students when they're speaking up, especially in large groups, saying that they've identified an issue and they need it adjusted or rectified. So my main point is I think we should listen to students more and also recognize that favoritism in disciplinary actions are one of the most frustrating things to deal with as students.
Thank you, Cassidy. Trustee Joe?
Or Cassidy, if you don't mind, I'd like to get some clarity on what you said on the first point, particularly about the favoritisms on the disciplinary actions. What I'm hearing, and if I'm hearing correctly, please correct me, is that in the example you gave was the AP class that you're taking, a number of students was disruptive. The teacher give up on the entire collective as a classroom, but then dole out punishments, harsher punishment for those students who were normally not, usually misbehaving. Can you clarify that for me?
So I know in one of my classes, there's been two instances where a student has physically thrown something at another student and has faced zero punishment. Our teachers aren't reporting these incidents that are concerning and are being repeated because the first time it was just a Chromebook, which was the school's property, and I'm shoving off, but that's serious. If somebody throws a computer at you, you're gonna be furious. The second time was a Chromebook, their shoes, and a very thick binder. I don't see. Yes. It was like our classroom is set up in like rows, and the disruptive students were sitting on the other side, so like where Mr. Adams is sitting, and a student chucked stuff at Mr. Adams. That's my clearest example. Sorry. So I'm personally seeing students aren't first of all taking their classes seriously, and they're not getting punished or having disciplinary actions taken against them when they are participating in harmful behaviors. While if another student who is favoritized or, in lack of better words, has higher potential, is slacking behind, they are going to receive, oh, I'm so disappointed in you. Why are you doing this? And they're going to receive a punishment while the other student hasn't. So that's what I'm seeing in my classes, where students aren't being held accountable for their misbehavior, and students who are higher performing are being held accountable for not doing their homework one day, or small, simple, little mistakes or actions.
Thank you. Okay, so I want to bring us back. I want to be conscious of time. We have about 30 minutes left. I want to ask the administration, what is it that you need from us so that we can, Maria? Okay, yeah, just so that we give you all what you need as we move forward in this process.
But you also asked for some guidance.
Yeah, this.
from the group. And I would like to offer some suggestions after you two speak.
Can you speak up or turn on the mic, please?
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
The number one bit of feedback that I believe the task force would benefit from receiving from trustees is as you look at these 4 items that were highlighted at the very beginning and for which the task force spoke their perspectives on, it would be important for the trustees to give us some feedback. Where are you most interested in hearing ideas, more fine tuning of what the concerns are? You've heard some wonderful snapshots from all sorts of perspectives. And we know that there's only so much that you can do at one time. And it might be helpful for you to say, you know, of all of these, here are the 2 that we need the most energy and focus on in order to do a little bit more fine tuning of gathering more information or getting more ideas. Superintendent.
Thank you for that. And with that, what would be helpful in what form or what type of information would be helpful for you, for us to present to you on December 14th at the board meeting?
I mentioned this earlier, but we've said, you know, we might offer our thoughts or responses to what we heard. I can't recall everything I heard, which is why I asked that you create a narrative of basically what does this data say, or what are people interpreting it saying? And the folks who reported out basically offered a verbal, you know, narrative. I want that captured so I can read it, so I can have some thinking about it and see where others' thinking is already at, you know. And so either the folks who reported out write their own little summary, or you interview them and help them prepare or create or generate, you know, a summary. That would help me in beginning to engage my own thought process. But further, for the next meeting, which is what date? For the task force.
The task force will meet, and then we'll be bringing you our next work on December 14th.
Oh, so this group that includes all 5 board members, we're not meeting in November again?
No, the next group will be, the next meeting is the task force as the 48 members of the task force
Oh,
as a whole.
so then the next time I have an opportunity to engage is at the December board meeting?
Correct.
And not I thought this table was going to have 2 or 3 meetings before it went to the board.
Right now it's scheduled for 1, but
One.
tonight, and then December
Okay.
14th.
What would help me as a policymaker that ultimately has to grapple with competing perspectives and decisions that have to be made, I would like, as one starting point, for the administration to generate its own framework of recommendations as a draft, as talking points draft, and for anyone else at the table to generate, if they want to do the work, generate your framework of recommendations, and for some consolidation of that for discussion to be made available for discussion at a table like this. You know, that will do a lot of work that I won't have to do then. I can then start to engage with, we're not generalizing anymore. We're being very specific. Here's what potentially could go for discussion and decision to the full board at a regular meeting.
So I think that's what we have been engaging with as a task force, getting those ideas and those thoughts from people so that the superintendent can make the recommendation to the board.
Yeah, but I'm talking even before he gets to that point.
Right. And so that's what we've been doing as a task force, getting people's perspectives and ideas so that that could inform how they're going, what they're going to focus on, and what they're hearing, there being energy around.
We have a little difference in interpretation here, and it's a crucial distinction. You know, we've created a very broad framework of perspectives and emphasis and key points and what have you. That's a great map to start with. But to get to what we're really going to grapple with, somebody needs to now themselves make the recommendations for discussion in this setting.
Yeah,
In-
and which is what,
No. Before this table convenes again with all five, I want to already have an insight into what is he drawing from all of this and what could potentially be his set of recommendations for the administrations and anyone else at the table to generate a recommendation, not a perspective. Give it to me in writing so that I can look at it, think about it, so that we can talk about it. And out of that emerges what goes to the board. Right now, we're not there.
so Maria, maybe we can figure out like how to make sure that we get more information that would be helpful for trustee Herrera. As the recommendation is made from the superintendent.
Yeah, so certainly one of the things that we can provide you, Supervisor Herrera, is the Superintendent Herrera. We did collect a lot of the individual comments that the task force has made, which led to the 4 items that you see here. And it's possible that that summary would inform you of more of the perspective, more of the context, how these 4 items emerged. And we can provide you a little bit more background on that.
That's not what I'm looking for. Can you interpret for me what you're hearing and what I'm asking for?
Yeah, discussion hasn't really even began on any serious issue. And I think part of what you're getting at. If we're talking about having a board meeting on December 14th with simply one task force meeting to refine key ideas, nothing's going to be refined. We're going to be beginning the discussion. And so I'm kind of seeing December 14th board session. What's the point of that? I'm not seeing one because I can guarantee based upon the minimal discussion that happened on Friday, we're not going to resolve and we're not going to come to the board with any sort of agreed upon resolution after one more meeting. I just don't see that as at all in the cards at this time. I don't know if anyone from the administration would disagree, but I don't see a point in putting things on the board unless they're going to ultimately build towards something that can be actionable. And nothing's really actionable right now. And I would like to see the same thing. I don't mind writing something up. I can share it with you, share with me, what you write. We can kind of have some sort of agreed upon communication over the narrative here, and it can be shared with the entire task force. Because that could then lead to, well, I'll propose things that I believe, you'll propose things you believe, you propose things you believe, and we can then discuss those propositions at the task force. And then those propositions through the discussion can then be presented to the board.
But that already happened.
No, it hasn't. It hasn't even begun.
It's going to have to happen at a finer level of detail and where it starts translating into action. That's clearly understood. The December 14 board session, it's an agendized item. It's not a session like this. We have a regular board meeting that night. So that's why we hold it. I think that if we do get from the board some areas of emphasis or short-term, long-term, like what would you like to see prioritized? I think we can start to bring the research and the discussion that creates some narratives around how people are holding this and where it could possibly go.
I think one of the things that I noticed in observing the task force in action and even tonight is that would be helpful to me is if the task force could go a little deeper in terms of what, of the 4 things, there's, the number 1 around security personnel and security training for our existing personnel. And I think those things look different depending on what security issue you're focused on. So being focused on keeping people off campus who want to come onto your campus and do harm, that's a different approach than, as Mr. Adams was talking about, students getting into fights or assaults into, assault situations. That's a very different intervention, right? And a different need. And I also heard that during the discussion with the task force, there was some confusion too about what even, maybe what the expectations are. So for example, if people are expecting that we're going to have one officer per campus who's the same person there every day, building relationships with kids, playing basketball after school, that's probably not going to happen, right? Because that's, I think some people were surprised or maybe even disbelieving that the officers that we would get to, that we could even conceivably get to come work with our campuses are actually off-duty police officers. So this would be by definition work that they've done after they've completed 40 hours of their own or more shift, right, of their own primary occupation. So I think those, having the task force get clear about what even their expectations are, you know, if they're thinking that officers are going to be there to break up fights, is that really going to happen? Is that how they operate, or do they expect that something else will happen? So I think just getting clear on those expectations and what those safety priorities are, getting a little more clear about that would help us in terms of addressing what's the problem, what's the issue we're solving, right? Or what's the priority of the issue that we're addressing.
Are there areas of emphasis? Are there places that the board has some kind of like-mindedness of where the group should be delving into first?
Well, like for training for campus monitors, I mean, that's on the number one issue. What would that be? What would that look like? Who would provide it? You know, I'd be interested as a board member in knowing.
Or, you know, if we have campuses that are on the high end of feeling safe and having a nurturing environment, are we going to apply that same remedy to campus? Then what we're talking about campuses with a low feeling of safety and a low feeling of nurturance? It's not, is it going to be same size fits all approach?
That's a good question. The old ways it was static. Do we move to a more fluid approach? If we look about the last 3 years of schools, there was, so those are all things that we'd want our task force to delve into.
That's why I'm saying if you put a draft of actionable items of recommendation that the board would deliberate on in a regular meeting of the board, every actionable thing, a decision is being made, we're going to do it this way, not that way, in spite of all the input, you know? So if that gets on the table, we can hash it out here with the multiple perspectives and life experiences, hash it out and see where we agree and where we don't agree. You know, and the only thing different from that is, you know, I was just saying, well, if anybody else wants to generate something that would be an actionable, you know, item for recommendation for the board's consideration, put it in the mix here too. But we're talking about, this is the item that's going to be discussed and voted on.
Okay.
As a draft.
Go ahead, Maria.
So in the amount of time that the task force has at the next meeting, it's possible that we're only able to look item to that level of detail. Simply because, as you've heard from members, there's a lot of really strong feelings about each and every one of these. And I would be, I'm just making an observation that the one that has had the most discussion is the first one here on this list. And so if you're looking for really specific details where all of the task force has a chance to engage, to really name some of those ideas in more detail, it might be that that's what we need to do first. I just want to be honest about the amount of time that it takes to create that kind of.
If you use a group process to craft a recommendation, it'll take a very long time. But that's not what I'm looking at. That's not what I would do. You know, what I would do is based on what you already know from the discussion. There's one way to approach it, actionable item 1, 2, 3, or here's a different way to approach it, action item 1, 2, 3. Put it in front of them. Don't make them do the work over several meetings. And they can just say, Yeah, we agree with that represents our thinking on this part, and that represents our thinking on the other approach. And we can see what shakes out of it, you know, and then bring that same kind of thing to this table where all trustees are present. And we can be a part of
Yeah.
that deliberative discussion.
And I appreciate what Maria is saying about it being one of the top ones, but I also want to just make sure that we're mindful as people have talked on one of each of those, they reference the other three because they understand that it's got to be multifaceted in its approach. So I think if we were to just focus on one, we'd have to just also inform you that we would be talking kind of on the side here about future proactive responses and trainings and academic responses as well, all those things that are and relationships and all those other things that are embedded in the other three items.
If we were looking to take basically a full school year, we could take it pretty damn slowly and deliberately and group kind of way of working it out and what have you. But we're not looking to take a year, in which case, and the facilitators and the administration need to jumpstart each meeting with you interpreting what has been said already, and putting it into an actionable response that can be discussed, refined, yayed and nayed.
Okay, I want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity, all board members have an opportunity to share, give the superintendent direction. Go ahead, trustee Lay.
I was wondering, December 14 board session, if we don't have enough time to digest this 4 key area, should we move to the following month or we have to do it on December 14?
You don't have to do it on December 14. You could call for another study session in the future.
Yeah, because this is a very important. We have not been in depth. You know, those key areas are very important. And I can see that all of them affected one way or the other from teachers, staff, student. But if we don't really evaluate in depth, and we make a decision as a policymaker, then consequences, we're going to have to go back and revise it, right? So I think if we take a little bit more time to evaluate it, to digest it, and really to find what we hear from different stakeholders, and we make the decision probably the months after December board session, board meeting. So that's, I think, what I think is now time is like we have 1 month left.
Is there a topic that you feel energy around?
Well, I'm very think is the more campus security personnel, and the third one is develop clear and consistent consequences for disruptive behavior and follow through, because they are kind of like combined and working together. I mean, affecting student as well, affecting staff and teachers. So those things I think is important that we can elaborate it, can do some little bit more study before we jump in a conclusion. That's okay. That's how I think.
Trustee Cortez, anything you'd like to add? Trustee Doe, where do you feel most energy around? And more, you said? Can you turn on your mic and?
So what I was saying is, you asked me what I feel energy for, every single one of those and more. But time is of the essence. At one point, we simply cannot just sit and wait. So I am very much aligned to what Trustee Herrera said earlier about demonstrations or different educational partner putting it on the table. If we need to have additional study sessions between now and the December 14, I'm certainly would be more than happy to. I don't know if you are comfortable, but the sooner we can take some step at having a real meaningful conversations, such as the one we have today. Because I'm hearing a lot of nugget that I'm hearing piecemeal here and there, but I'm hearing more and more crystallized in this meeting task force. So if we can have more of that, and then so the administration can hear where we are standing and where we align, so they can formulate their recommendations with a little better insight. That would be helpful for the administration, I imagine. Can you help? Michelle can nod the head or not shake their vigorously so I can know that we're in the right directions. But I do want to make sure that we provide that guideline, because at the end of the day, that is our job as trustees, to provide that directions.
I could, off the top of my head, not now in this moment, but if I went home and gave it some thought, I could come up with option 1, option 2, and option 3, probably. Variations on the theme reflecting opposite thinking, that I've already heard just from.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that we have here to work with, but what I feel like I'm hearing is a need or a want for one more study session. Is that?
At least one more of this
Okay.
group, at
Okay,
least, if
what,
not
okay,
2 more.
at least one more study session between now and the December 14th meeting. I'm hearing as soon as possible. I'm gonna be honest, I too, I'm not a fan of dragging things off, but I also hear you, Trustee Lamb, aligned with you and saying like, we gotta be very thoughtful about what we do moving forward, because if we move too quickly or, don't go deep enough, then we might have to come back. Right? But I think there is a balance between being thoughtful and getting it done and not waiting forever to get it done. Right? So if we could find some sort of balance here between these competing things. And I do want to add a few things from my perspective too, as a trustee, not just the facilitator here. I get so caught up in being the facilitator. I'm like, I want to make sure. I feel a lot of energy around all of these. And I hear 1 and 3. But I also see number 2 and number 4 as being very proactive. And there was a lot of energy around proactivity, especially this last session. And I want to bring us back to that because the other 2, especially the first one, is more reactive in many ways. The third one goes both ways, right? But if we really want to get ahead of this and listen to the deep themes, like we got to give the other 2 just as much energy, if not even more, right? And so I want to put that out there. I want to double tap on what Vito said with the research. I want us to think about what is our present state of state and what could our future be? So what we address now might look different. How we address the situations or certain areas now might look different later, which speaks to your fluidity piece. And students that at the table. I heard these 3 students tonight, but the actual students in some way, shape, or form, because they're the ones making certain decisions. And so we want to understand what is behind your thinking process when you make a certain decision. So however that looks like.
I think you've given us a lot of input. Like you, I'm going to reserve the right to synthesize for a little bit before we come up with our definitive next step. So I think what we'll do is we'll take it all in tonight. We'll hear these recommendations. We'll work with our with admin team and facilitators and probably a couple representative groups from our task force and structure a way forward and then and work with that.
Great work in such a short amount of time. And, I'm only operating with the sense that we probably have not a whole lot of time to bring this for some public discussion and decision making.
But I appreciate that. And I want to thank the group and our facilitators for that. But I also want to recognize that Ed Services and Student Services has been doing good work along the way that allows us to look at this and go, hey, I think we have an idea for what could be next and builds on this.
Right.
And I understand, we have our relationship with the Office for Civil Rights, which our task force hasn't even heard of yet, which we'll just have to inform them of because that's important, right? Like this guy has, right? But that's strong work, and our disproportionality data has to be explored that we've looked at as a board in years past, and to be able so that we respond comprehensively. And I think that we've made some starts to that. When there is something happening at an individual site, we have the freedom to be able to respond uniquely to that in the short term. But we do want to make sure that we work comprehensively and forward thinking.
I'm not sure.
I'm watching. I'm
not sure, Board President Chavez, if you were saying that right at the end of your remarks, but I want to reaffirm again that somewhere in the very near future, ideally before our next task force meeting, that there will be some listening circles with students, including students who are the most challenging students, to get more out more of an understanding than we can glean from the survey.
I also want to just recognize, I want to go back to what I said a minute ago with Ed Services. Ed Services and our site teams have done great work at establishing equity councils and establishing other groups within their campus. It is sometimes very difficult forgetting some of our most impacted students to take a Monday night and come to a district office, what is a
Right.
district office and who are these people, and to open up. So we have the opportunity to leverage with the questions, and the task force can recommend a range of questioning or get the feedback of a series of questions that can happen with those impacted youth at sites across our district. So
don't
we'll
think you can-
employ all those tools.
I don't think you can do a surveillance method with that population. I think you need to find a way to hone down the essence of something and engage them around that in the way that they would engage.
And that's why, sorry, East Side, I'm gonna say it again, that's why I love being part of the East Side Union High School District, because we've been mindful and building things. And yeah, okay, so look, we can revisit consequences. Let's do that. Let's do it in a way that's humane and build people up. But let's also make sure that we build mindful of student experiences that we can now get their input from because of groups and committees that were born, that have been presented here and are in a space where their voice can be given without having to come here particularly.
Right.
Yeah.
We're about that. Cool.
So I'm hearing you hear what we're saying, and you're saying there's structures in place. We're gonna get it done. Hear that? Before we close out, yes, please.
I think for both sides, because you want to get things done, but you also want to get everybody's perspective. I think, for example, if you wanted to tackle one of those items, we know that there's things that we would like to do, but there's also things that we can do with what we have, right? So I think to Mr. Herrera's point is bring the information of what we know we can do, so that becomes part of what the task force has access to, so that maybe you have some shorter term things that you can do quickly, perhaps.
Okay. Thank you.
I thought we were pushing to a December deliberation and decisions, but that's not realistic. You know, we're going to have essentially a status report in December and ambitiously try to get to discussion and decisions in January.
Well, I mean, I think there are certain things that there's no way that we can get to December, if there's anything related to policy, which I get a sense that there is, especially because OCR is involved. But I trust the administration and that they can figure out what can be deliverable when. This is probably going to have to be spread out. It's not going to be like everything here at once. They've heard, I trust their judgment. They know that I think they're hearing that we need a little bit more, but this is.
I hear we need more time. We need a little more voice. And what the task force has known is that we're going to get input from you, and we're going to have to dig in for clarity and be able to make real suggestions. That in some cases might be 100% aligned, and other places that we'll have to kind of be mindful of the difference of opinions or approaches. Here are various paths that we could take.
Recognizing that there's a segment of our community that already thinks it's already taken too long for the board to deliberate and make decisions.
Right.
And do X, Y, and Z.
Yes, those voices are heard. Absolutely.
Okay, all right. We got what we need, Superintendent? Maria, both of you?
Yes, understand.
We good? Okay, look at this, y'all. It is
A little bit of walking on water there, but I think they can do it.
It is 8:56. This meeting is adjourned.